Cops charged with corruption. That is what our first two guests, both of them reporters from DNAinfo, New York, will be talking about. They are columnist and criminal justice editor Murray Weiss. Thanks for being here, Murray.
Pleasure.
Good to see you and talk about this today. And we want to welcome back Jeff Mays, DNAinfo's political director. Thank you both for being here today. So we got a lot of headlines in our face talking about this police corruption. Before we really dig into it, let's do broad strokes. Like, we're somewhere between Serpico and getting a ticket thrown out. So where does it fall along that scale?
I'd say it falls sort of in the middle.
Okay.
I think it's a long way from Serpico.
Yeah.
Because back in those days, the entire police department was pretty...
The Wild Wild West.
Yeah, completely rogue and corrupt on every level possible.
Okay.
But here, what's crept back into the police department is bosses in the police department. It's very unusual, rather than cops.
Right.
Forgetting what their ethical restrictions are. They're taking gifts from people. They're taking free travel, hotel rooms from people who
Ladies of the nights.
In the case of one Super Bowl weekend, a guy treated him to a prostitute, paid her $10,000 to go out to the Super Bowl with him. So what you have here is the upper echelon of the police department is the bosses. The people who are supposed to keep the officers in line are actually the ones being accused here of the wrongdoing. And that's pretty serious.
Well, let's talk about the ramifications then, because Jeff, when there's like the rank and file, you can say, you know, bad apples. That's what we always hear. But when it reaches this level and there's like commanders and people who are making decisions and they have their 1 PP, that's more high level stuff. Do heads roll in executive offices, mainly in the mayor's office, when your real people are the ones who are under indictment?
Well, I thought it was interesting the other day, Commissioner Brattons said he thought this was confined to a few bad apples. And as Murray said, that this was not a departmental-wide situation. But still, the commissioner still has to be upset about this. He looked a little pained standing at that press conference with Preet Bharara the other day. And I think what's interesting is what remains to be seen is that the two businessmen at the center of bribing all these police officers is also connected to the mayor's fundraising issues. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen.
There over $100,000 he gave to one of the campaigns that the mayor was trying to
his nonprofit. Yeah, gave money to his nonprofit. They also bundled money for his campaign as well. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen and what the connection is going to be between what's happening on the police side and then what's going to happen.
Actually, one of the gentlemen who was arrested, I think when the mayor went to both of them were on the mayor's inauguration committee. And I think the mayor's first trip after he won was actually to one of these gentlemen's home. So, you know, there is a closeness between them. And generally, when people are corrupt in one area, they're corrupt in other areas. Exactly.
So especially when they're so close to the most powerful person in the city, presumably would be in the mayor. So we want to know what they got for this service. Like, we've heard of, like, there was a secret police, or it's like a police on call, I think was one of the terms that people are throwing around. But really, what do they walk away with after all this money spent?
Well, what they were able to do, which you probably can't do, is you can just call up somebody of some high rank in the police department and say, hey, I'm having a problem with another business. And in one case, one of the businessmen who was arrested is in the jewelry business and was having a problem in the Diamond District with another business. And the police came over and started investigating what was going on. And there was like a cop working off duty for the rival company, and that officer got in trouble. So basically, what in the words of the U.S. Attorney, you know, they had their own private police force working for them, doing escorts for friends. If people got stopped on the street, there was a guy who was driving like a lunatic, and the police let him go because
off these guys.
So they were getting you know, favors of real worth, and in return for that, they were getting hotel bills in Rome paid for and Chicago paid for, trips on planes to the Dominican Republic.
So looking at this scandal now, it might be one thing to Preet Bharara, but to the regular folks in New York City, do you think that they're seeing this as sort of a victimless crime? It's like this idea of the rich have a whole other thing going on, but people on the ground may be more concerned with broken windows policies or the stop and frisk thing. So do you think there's any groundswell from the public that would have political ramifications?
I mean, the mayor has tried to spin this as, you know, the public doesn't really care about these sort of situations, but his poll numbers show otherwise. He is at his lowest point ever in the polls, and his challengers are gaining ground. So whereas before, you know, it wasn't looking like someone would be able to beat him in a primary, now it looks like people are gaining ground in the primary. So obviously the public is paying attention to this. And I think any time there's a misuse of tax money or police authority, the public is interested in it. And even if the public isn't interested, the U.S. attorney is. And so there are going to be consequences regardless.
Do you think that the U.S. attorney is going to be knocking on the mayor's door anytime soon? If they're following the money and the maximum was given, and that's just what we know about, and these guys are singing like canaries, they're giving it all up and naming names. How long and how many degrees are we away from de Blasio?
Well, the U.S. attorney has subpoenaed some of the highest level people closest to the mayor.
This mayoral executive privilege, he's telling everyone don't talk, so we've heard.
Well, I'm not going to say that.
Yeah.
But he, you know, obviously he's told people to be cautious and maybe get attorneys. But the U.S. attorney is not doing this lightly. They're not subpoenaing people in the office of the mayor without having, in my opinion, some criminality that they believe is there. These aren't like fishing expeditions.
Yeah.
So I'd say that there are a handful of people that are going to be in serious trouble.
I mean, the U.S. attorney said the investigation is not over.
Well, he's no joke. He's the scariest man, the biggest boogeyman in all of New York.
So, I mean, he's previously said stay tuned. At his last press conference with the officers, he said that the investigation was continuing, even though, you know, there was no direct link between these NYPD people who were arrested and the mayor, but he said the investigation is continuing. And in addition, as you mentioned, one of the businessmen involved is now a cooperating witness, according to sources. So that opens up a whole nother avenue of what's out there. What does he know? What areas is the U.S. attorney going to be exploring now?
So speaking of the guys and their singing, there's some news of a wiretap where he's saying, hey, I can make anyone the commissioner. Like, I've got the power now. And I'm looking at Bratton, who was involved in another scandal during his last tenure with folks selling cocaine out of officers, and it's like every 20 years, like something bad happens with the NYPD, and the last time he was in the seat still. So does this not bode well for his future in New York City as the commissioner second time around?
I think, no, I think he'll come out of this fairly well. You know, he's in some, you know, pretty ugly white water right now, but if there's only a few more officials who are in trouble in the police department, then, you know, this will wash out and time will pass. I mean, this is not good when the people at the highest level who are supposed to be and have the perception of being really clean aren't. You know, they've just lost their compass. Well, I think it's going to be difficult for him for a while, but I don't think it's going to change. You know, crime is low. As you were saying before, you know, what people really care about. This stuff is very bad for reinforcing a lot of cynical views about the police, things that people think about the police. You know, these kind of corruption things only cement people's negative views, but crime is low. And so I think Bratton's kind of legacy will be okay.
So what about political will, though? Because this could come back to really make things bad for the people of New York if a person like Andrew Cuomo can see the mayor and the police commissioner as weak right now, because we could lose a lot of power that would shift back to Albany. Especially, we're hearing about the governor launching an investigation into what might be akin to Bridgegate with Tunnelgate, with one of these guys popping off to show one of his friends, oh, look how powerful I am. I can get this whole lane in the tunnel shut down. What does that do to the balance of power? Like, Cuomo could come in and make things really difficult in the city.
Well, I think, first of all, the governor has his own investigations that he's probably concerned about right now. Some of his closest aides.
Well, that's why he's got to make a lot of noise down here.
So he has his own issues. But I think you do see this having some effect on the city. There was a development project in Brooklyn Bridge Park where the governor did not want to pass, did not want to sign off on that because there was some concern whether this was caught up in the corruption scandal, whether money had been involved in influencing that project. And now you hear also the mayor recently was just given a 1-year term of mayoral control of schools.
And they wanted
he wanted several, and at least 3. And the Senate Republicans repeatedly mentioned this sort of idea that there's a scandal. You know, how is the mayor running things? So this has really harmed the mayor. It has really harmed his agenda as he heads into re-election. This is not the time when you want to be dealing with scandal. You want to be prepping the public about what you've accomplished in these last 3 years and lead into re-election. Yeah.
So Murray, where's the rubber going to meet the road in terms of everyday working people? We talked about those concerns and the fact that he may be taking some hits and a lot more vulnerable as we do go into a political season. But for the everyday New Yorkers and folks in Brooklyn, do you think that a tipping point is coming where people are going to say outright, whoa, what's happening? This isn't cool?
Well, on the police front, I think people feel that way. But the police come to work and do their job. You know, there's 35,000 of them. So I think the public still has, you know, sort of affection for the police department. I mean, they want their police. They want their police to be, you know, clean and honest. I think in the broader picture for the mayor, this is very problematic. And to your point about Cuomo, you know, there's no love lost between the two of them. So any chance that he has to embarrass the mayor, and step into New York City issues. So I think this is, even though he's an incumbent, it's very hard to unseat an incumbent. Somebody has to run against him. But he's been hurt, I think, and people, as Jeff would, I think, would attest to as well. There are people talking about whether making a run. So I think he's weak, and I think weakened, and I think the public is wondering, you know, what's happening with him, and maybe change wouldn't be a bad thing.
So I would just say that the mayor ran as a reformer. And he was going to come in, reform the police department.
He had his son out there,
reduce stop and frisk. So these actions don't look good for someone who has billed themselves as a reformer to have police officers taking these sort of favors and gifts. It just leads to people's suspicion, as Murray has already said.
So you're talking about those suspicions. Is this vindication for folks who were giving him the side eye when he's like, I'm bringing Bratton back? Do you think that someone's patting himself on the back right now saying, hey, that's your boy, we told you we don't want him?
Well, the commissioner hasn't been implicated in any of this whatsoever, so it may be hard to make that link. I mean, I think people's issues with Bratton tend to be about his policing style, his support of broken windows policing, and more of those issues. But again, this issue, for those who were already suspicious of the police department, I think you're right, this just reinforces their original beliefs.
So besides Philip Banks waking up feeling pretty good about himself right now, the man who would be commissioner, who is benefiting from this, whether there are people who are getting ready to challenge the mayor or there's whispers about it, like who's in the right seat right now where this was good news waking up?
Well, I think the borough president of Brooklyn is somebody who
was a former officer of the law.
So, you know, that could work to his advantage. You know, he knows the place inside and out, and, you know, he could actually come in with a policy approach that would sound strong to the public. Hakeem Jeffries out here. Everybody wants him to run. Scott Stringer, too.
I saw him last night. Before we get off of Borough President Adams, though, do you think it would be enough for him to come in as saying, hey, I've been the man on the inside? Would that be a foothold in getting him to the city level politics? Like, I know from the inside that I can reform these things.
Well, it's tough going from a borough president position to dealing with a citywide issue. There's always a name recognition issue there. And I think the mayor is weakened, and I think the Democratic primary is still going to be a tough battle for anyone who steps up to challenge him. Where I think he is susceptible is in a general election where you have a Bloomberg-esque sort of candidate, some sort of wealthy businessman who can say, look, I don't need to engage in these transactional politics. You know, I'm above a reproach when it comes to dealing with money. So I think that's where the mayor is potentially endangered.
So I'm looking at that election map right now, and I'm just thinking in the city, as election time comes closer, what issues do you think on the justice front people will be paying attention to? If the police corruption is sort of a through line from now until then, what other issues are going to present themselves?
I think the broken windows, you know, whether the quality of life kind of enforcement is still going to be an issue, whether there's still over-policing in minority communities, what the crime levels are. You know, it doesn't take much I remember when there was a very ugly racial case, and it tipped an election from one candidate to another. So when the police world, one little flashpoint moment can really touch the entire city. But I think if crime remains low, I think these other issues are important. And of course now whether the police department is corrupt or not. I think those would be the key issues going forward.
From the top down. And
then also in City Hall, you know, this corruption stuff is going to begin to move from the police department. People are going to, you know, they're going to arrest maybe some more police people, but then the issue
of corruption is out there, people keep sniffing.
Well, people will, you know, roll and cooperate, but the story is going to move from the police department into City Hall and the political arena too over the next year, really.
It's going to cross the street to City Hall. Well, we'll definitely be reading DNAinfo to keep abreast of the developments and see how far up or down this corruption thing goes. So Murray Weiss, and thank you, sir, for being here today. We appreciate it. Let's do it again. Thanks, Jeff.